This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium, Kara Lovehart, and I am interviewing today Dr. Alja Podgornik, and we are going to be talking about neuroscience, the subconscious, theta healing, and changing patterns from our root cause. And today we are actually going to be diving deeper into this topic of how do we change not just our unconscious, how can what we do individually ripple out? Dr. Alja is a neuroscientist and a subconscious reprogramming expert certified in Theta Healing. She helps conscious and spiritual entrepreneurs skyrocket their business success by removing subconscious belief systems that are keeping them stuck. And she is particularly passionate about working with entrepreneurs who are here to dismantle the oppressive systems of patriarchy and white supremacy and use their medicine to create a just and harmonious world for all living beings. So when I originally connected with Alja, I was really excited because we shared such a common thread in not just looking at things from this bigger picture about how when we change ourselves, it ripples out, but even just the bridging of the science and the spiritual and how we understand ourselves as really full spectrum beings. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to really dive into this. This is going to be a deep conversation today. So we're just going to start off from the beginning. Alja, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to be who you are now and what you're doing at this time.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm also really excited for this. So I'm trained as a scientist. I originally come from Slovenia, and when I was 18, I moved to England because I really wanted to study neuroscience, and there are not many neuroscience programs at the undergraduate level. So I moved to London, spent 4 years there, really diving in. I really loved it. I was really good at it. It was like really something that I was so deeply passionate about, to the point that after those 4 years, I went and got a PhD position in Germany, and I moved to Germany and then did the PhD for the next 4.5 years. So altogether, that was about 8.5, 9 years of really being immersed in this, like really hardcore, quote unquote, academic research, academic background, very molecular, a lot of background in pharmacology. So understanding also how different compounds affect the body, how that is used in certain neuropsychiatric conditions, a lot of physiology, genetics, very biological program. It wasn't a lot of, let's say, psychology and behavior, but it was really looking at the body and how the nervous system works. You know, it's a funny thing because I come from a family where both of my parents are scientists, and when I was at university, I really embraced this identity of a scientist, which means I blocked out anything fluffy. I was not interested in spirituality. I was not interested in yoga. Like if anyone was doing yoga, I was kind of like, that's bullshit. It was this very arrogant kind of persona, which if I look back was actually never natural to me. Like I was very intuitive as a kid. Like, you know, I was one of those kids that people were like, oh, there's this concept called God. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I know God. And then I got there and it was such a thing of belonging and being seen in this way. And I had a lot of different imposter syndrome, the need to prove myself, all of those things. So I really embraced that. And then I went through a couple of experiences in my last year of university during my master's when I started really questioning things. You know, I started really learning through that experience that science is not always the way it's presented, right? It's not this like hard-coded thing. And especially when I learned more and more about pharmacology, how substances, pharmaceutical compounds are used to affect the body. I was specifically very interested in anxiety and depression, took a lot of modules to study that. I was like, wait a second, what do you mean there's not a single pharmaceutical drug that doesn't have side effects? And I was like, that's crazy, right? And then you start seeing this list and list and list. And I'm like, that's not right. That's weird, you know? And you start learning all these things. And you're like, that is not how it's portrayed outside. That's not what I thought I was signing up for. So I went into kind of this whole thing of really questioning a lot of things and so on. And I started exploring other modalities. And long story short, at the end of my 4th year, I went to my first ayahuasca retreat and I had my really big spiritual awakening. And it really turned my world upside down. I got to experience being connected to all the web of life, all of those things. And I was like, dang, this is very different to how I used to think about the world, even though it made so much sense. Immediately, I was like, that's it, you know? But then it was an interesting thing because coming out of that big spiritual awakening, I was going straight into moving countries, going to Germany, starting a PhD, again, in this very laboratory, basic science, like at the kind of almost lowest level that you do science, right? It's not even translational, looking to how you can apply that to humans, but it's really just like science. And I had a really, really rough time. Like I was really questioning, why am I doing this? What am I doing? And I also had kind of in parallel to that, my own personal journey with health. So since I was a kid, I had a lot of immune problems, like quote unquote incurable conditions, according to Western science. And as I started my PhD, having this dark night of the soul after the awakening and going back into that environment, combined with that, I was in like such a tough, stressful situation that my body really started shutting down to the point where, I lost something like 10 kilos in 3 months. And the whole thing was just all over the place. And at the time, because I understood Western medicine well enough, I was like, that's not going to help me. I need to find a different way, which initiated my journey into self-healing, into alternative medicine. And I went and I did a program for like Ayurvedic habits. I studied Ayurveda. And a year after, I actually became a coach, an Ayurvedic habit coach. So that's how my business started. That was 2021, I believe, 2020, 2021. So during COVID. And at the time, I already knew that I was going to do my career in I thought it was going to be healing, which of course changed recently. But I spent the next 3.5, 4 years in natural health, where I collaborated with other practitioners as well, working with some very difficult cases like stage 4 cancer and so on, mostly taking over the mental and emotional aspect of that. But I also led a group coaching program on Ayurvedic habits. And really through that whole process and doing a lot of other things, managed to heal all of these things I was told I would never be able to heal, right? We're talking eczema and allergies and all of these chronic things a lot more. And so I studied a lot of those things. I got a very wide exposure from breathwork to working with plant medicine. And slowly through this process, first it was very much looking at the physical aspect. And then the longer I was doing this, I was starting to really understand the role that emotions and the subconscious and beliefs were playing in health. And I started working with some clients after I got certified in Theta Healing, looking at the belief systems that were influencing their disease. And I was just, my mind was like blown because I was like, what is going on down there? Why does no one talk about these things? So I spent, 4 years in that field. And then recently I shifted my path completely again, which was prompted by the ongoing genocide in Gaza and Palestine, when I started getting I called it my second awakening, which really nicely coincided with my Saturn return, where I started then really understanding what kind of healing is necessary at the global stage. That I was like, I don't want to work with people who are, 50, 60 and all this. I actually want to do something to change the systems. And so I started really adjusting the technique I'm certified in, the subconscious reprogramming, to this cause. And so now my business has basically 2 pathways. One is working with other conscious and spiritual entrepreneurs who are really interested in advancing collective liberation and helping them get their medicine to the world, because we're in such a big planetary shift right now. Like we need all hands on deck. Like I really believe that we need healers, we need coaches, we need everybody who does this kind of work. And we need them so confident and ready to bring their medicine to the world. Like we need people who historically maybe wouldn't have put themselves on the front lines to actually be on the front lines. Like I say this so many times, we cannot have these overconfident, the most powerful people in the world right now are criminals. We can't have that going anymore. So we need people with the values and the heart in the right place, who haven't gone through, 5 stages of soul loss to be leading this world. So that's the first path. And then the second path that I'm working on, this is like in the background, but I'm hoping to release it within the next year or so. And we're going to talk more about it, is having programs that will help us uproot subconscious beliefs that have to do with it's really the core is separation, right? So the separation wound, where we forget that all is one. But what stems from this is colonialism, anthropocentrism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and all of these really root causes of the systemic issues we're seeing today. And so this is the path I'm developing in parallel, which I'm really hoping that this can be something that eventually can be brought to the world and employed at such a large stage that we really dig these things out at the roots so that we can build a totally, totally different world.
I'm getting full body goosebumps just throughout everything you're sharing, because I know for the listeners here, this is so much about what I talk about, and really bringing more and more guests in this field that are supporting the greater picture. And I keep getting this image, this visual, kind of all of us on this journey, right? We're all on this journey. We're walking along, kind of like feet on the ground in this perspective bubble that's maybe 3 feet away from us, or even maybe not at all. Maybe there is and again, we'll talk about the neurology of this, the connection with how is our brain affecting our ability to have perception beyond ourselves, but then it's like, as we go through these awakening points, and as I was hearing you talk about your journey from being very just science and your multiple awakenings, it's like your sphere of consciousness just grows. And it's just like you're this bird's eye view, and then your airplane eyes view, and then you're like global and like even beyond. And I think that's something that I feel so much passion and joy to just have met you and be able to continue to support what your work is and what you're doing to help other people. Because if we can help other people, like even if we are that individual is lifting people off the ground so they can see beyond their own sphere and understand these connections. Because there's people even where I live that are not aware yet. They don't have the education or the experiences to understand how this systemic disconnection, how it has reflected out and how it's manifested in colonization and white supremacy and this just separation. We're going to go on today talking about how the brain is affected and what happens with the brain with that. So yeah, I'm just really grateful for what you're doing and really to dive into more on this. So is there anything as far as moving from the science to more of the spiritual experiences that you want to share? I know ayahuasca was a big thing for you. You shared that breath work and Ayurveda. Is there anything else that was like when you switched over, like you had this little coming to another side under awareness of the expansion of everything, that you started to make connections also with the science and like, oh, wait, this is a different language to explain what this means in this particular field? Anything that kind of was your transition there that you want to share that you didn't share already? I'm just curious.
So for me, it was really my first ayahuasca experience that gave me this breakthrough. And afterwards, for me, it came very, very naturally. So for me, it made sense from very early on that, spirituality and science are just 2 different languages to describe the same thing. And I think Ayurveda was a really, really beautiful system to initiate me into that, because I could really start seeing the parallels between how Western science names certain things and how Ayurveda named it 5,000 years ago. And I was oftentimes getting very frustrated at the beginning with the ego aspect, when I would see, especially Western medical doctors, but it can happen also in alternative medicine, there is this complete rejection of the other side, which really does not serve anyone, right? We all need to always objectively look at the truth. Every system has some things that are very valuable, and every system is maybe lacking things for certain case scenarios, right, that another system has. So for a long time, my dream was having a healing center that would be really integrating all of these things, where you would have the best of all worlds, and you could walk people through the whole process. So Ayurveda was really, for me, as someone who studied a lot of physiology and biology, I was like, oh my God, this is all the same thing, right? When it comes to the physical things. And for me, it was a very easy jump from there as well. For anyone who has studied the brain and the nervous system, but in general, something that I see people forget is how limited our perception through our senses is, right? And if we study something like, let's say, the visual system in neuroscience, we learn very early on that, the conscious perception of the vision is really governed by very, very tiny percentage of the whole spectrum of light, right? What we see is like a tiny, tiny amount of what's available. What we hear is a tiny, tiny amount of what's available. And somehow, the very people who should know this best, the scientists, really forget that, right? Yeah, I think all of us are like, y'all, come on, we know this information, right? But rejecting the unseen, when we all know most of what is out there is unseen, that was something that I was like, and of course there's ego, there's beliefs, there's dogma, I get it why it's there, right? Mostly it's the need for belonging, because if you go there and you'll be like, everything's connected, and we literally have scientific proof for that, people are like, what? You're crazy. And I had plenty of those experiences myself. The vast majority of things we don't see. I will never forget, I watched the documentary. What is it called? It was a documentary narrated by, I think, David Attenborough, one of the natural ones, where they were showing how animals who have receptors for different wavelengths of light view the world around them. And so you could see how the birds and the beasts who see the UV light perceive the planet and the plants. And it was just this mind-blowingly beautiful documentary that really showed like how this perception is only one perception, right? How our senses are the quote unquote limitations, which there's nothing wrong with them, but they have their limitations on what is perceptible. And so for me, it was a very like logical, natural step that I was like, well, there's all of this unseen stuff. And there are all these systems that have actually learned how to work with that. And that was for me very intriguing immediately, right? I mean, also for those of, people who know astrology, I have a Pisces moon. I was immediately like, ooh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right. So it was very, very intuitive, but it definitely helped having this progression. And it was, for me, it really was a progression going from this very like physical, like science, quote unquote, tangible things to then stepping into Ayurveda, being like, that's all of these things they're describing in terms of energetics, to now ending up with a modality that is basically energy healing, right? With subconscious reprogramming. So it's been really this whole progression, which has been beautiful because it's allowed me to really bridge these things, but also I can really understand all the people on this path. Like I understand why they think the way they think. And
yes,
to tie onto one thing you said before as well, I think we have to give ourselves and people around us a lot of grace because we've been all really heavily indoctrinated. Our entire education has been designed and is stemming from these very systems that are the systems of oppression. That's the truth. They're oppressing some people on the physical level and exploiting them. And those of us who are called privileged are still oppressed at the level of the mind and the level of the spirit. So the oppression is the core tactic of these systems. And the education that's stemming from them is aimed at keeping status quo going. So it's understandable that right now a lot of people are waking up, which I would say I do not envy people who are waking up right now because it's a tough wake-up call. There's a lot to see. It's really like, I'm glad I had my awakening 7 years ago. But we need to give people also grace that the activation energy today to wake up to what's going on is high. Mm-hmm. It's high. It still is. And that's okay. And the process is unfolding in its due time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting full body goosebumps like the whole time. I'm just like, yes, 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 yes. I think what's really fascinating about this journey of awakening too, and having so many people wake up now, and they're still, we're still in the process. You and I are still unfolding and expanding our consciousness. This whole kind of black and white beginning end, that's a consciousness of where we've come from, of this beginning end point, these duality. And it's forever expanding, growing. And that's something that may not make sense depending on where you're at in the journey. And there is no hierarchy. There's no, oh my gosh, we're evolved beyond where you are. It's not linear and it's not hierarchical. And I think that's where the ego and the identity gets stuck, where we compare. And then that's where you said, where there's this potential contrast where people see, well, alternative medicine is quote unquote better than Western medicine because they're doing these things. And I have actually struggled as a, not just a podcaster, but as a business owner who's really in holistic health and runs a holistic clinic, of finding practitioners who are in that space who understand that they're married together. Because they are on their own journey. They may have had poor experiences and are processing their own trauma with Western medicine, whatever happened to them. Or even with alternative practices, they had a poor, unethical, maybe unlicensed practitioner that wasn't well enough versed in understanding power differentials or scope of practice and has done harm. So it is really all this beautiful bridge. And I do say that there's a lot of individuals that are into alternative medicine and energy medicine, like, of course, like myself, mediums. And we are always pulling as much as we can from a lack of understanding of academics and how research is actually done, because we didn't all of us train in how to understand how to read different research papers. So I think a lot of us are grasping for straws, even though it's not necessarily straws. There's a lot of amazing research out there. But when you see individuals who are just holistic practitioners, not have any academic background, if they're going and saying, well, the science is proving this, right? And we're saying the science, but then we're showing someone else who's academic. They're like, you don't have any science degree. How can you even read these research papers? How do you even know? And I know when you were sharing about David Attenborough, right? I was actually trying to look up what it was because I feel like I saw the same documentary, but it was like 10 years ago. I mean, there's a lot of documentaries he's done. And this one was specifically about, again, back at that time, I was like, how do I prove to people that I'm seeing or experiencing beyond the light spectrum? And then I think it was talking about bats. That was one of the things. And then bees, and they see an infrared, right? That was like my first, like, this is the science, and I'm not a scientist, but can I just start to use this as sort of an anecdotal, here you go. Does this make sense? And even, for example, they always say, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. This is kind of a rabbit hole thing, but cats can see a little bit more of the light spectrum because they can see at night too. So they have a little bit more of ability to see. And you can see that their little pupils get really big when they're bringing in more light into their eye. And I always say to people when they say, well, how do you see auras? I think I just see a little bit beyond what we normally would measure as the visible light spectrum. And I said, how I do that is I just simply bring awareness to my peripheral vision, which where we see a little bit more of the light spectrum from the peripheral side. So we can watch like a predator or something coming. We'll see something move and we quickly look. But when I bring my awareness there, that's when I shift my consciousness and I can see color. Like to me, it's like super, like, why not? Why can't everyone do that? And that's how I try to tell people to experience themselves, because I don't think it's something that's supernatural powers. Like I think the expanded consciousness of being intuitive and all these things, well, let's dive into that for the neuroscience of it too as we go forward. But I don't think these things are supernatural. I don't think that these things are out of reach for everyone. So
I agree with you 100%. And I think, one thing we can look at is we can go at the very like hardcore science part where we simply look at, let's say, what are the receptors a being has, right? Because we have, one number of receptors. So we have 3 receptors for colors, and then we have a 4th receptor for seeing at night, which is just black and white, right? But then you look at something like a mantis shrimp, I think they have 14 different receptors, right? So the way they see the world is going to be totally different. Exactly like the snakes and I think cats both see more in the infrared spectrum. So they can detect their prey at night because they effectively see temperature, right? So that we could see, and we could, do genetic sequencing, or we could just like look at what they have. And we know that there are certain people, I think predominantly it's women because it's connected to the X chromosome, that have 4 receptors for color. So they see shades of color that other people cannot see at all. So that we know from like the very kind of hardcore science that it's possible. Then I also think there is the subtlety of perceiving energy. And I think that's available to everyone. I also, from my experience, right, we talk about being clairvoyant, clairsentient, clairaudient. People have a little bit different means of perceiving energy, but everyone can perceive energy because we're energy beings first, right? Matter comes out of energy. That we know, right? And so everyone has an ability to perceive that. So for me, I am now training myself to see a lot more, but I naturally am very like clairsentient. Like I can feel things very much. If I do healings on others, I feel what's happening in their body, right? So also people have these different abilities that manifest a bit differently. And I think with expansion in consciousness, and also as we expand our subtle bodies more, right? In the West, we are so focused on the gross parts of the human being. So different systems look at this differently. But for example, Ayurveda looks at 5 layers of being a human, right? And the outermost layer, or rather the densest layer, is like the food body, it's called, right? Annamaya kosha, which is like this dense part that we can see. But then there are 4 other bodies that are going progressively. You have the energy body and the breath body, right? Then you have the mental, emotional body, the intuitive body, right? Which is second to last. And then the bliss body, which is closest to the soul. And so as we also, first of all, like clearing out toxicity and getting rid of what's really gross, like heavy energies from the body, allow us to perceive more subtle things. So that I think is also from the energetics point, and we all have these capacities. And then I think it's the bridge, and that I have no idea how much science there's behind this. So probably I would get lynched, right? Talking about this with like my scientific colleagues, but that's okay. We're past that stage for a long time now. How can our DNA upgrade? Because we know from science that the vast majority of DNAs, and this speaks to scientific arrogance, they call it junk DNA, right? So many people may have heard of that. And that's simply parts of the DNA that do not code for proteins. So they're not genes that code for proteins, but scientists are like, well, we don't know what they do, so they must be junk. And that's something like 80% of it, it's like a really, really large amount. And I don't know if I got that number right. It could be higher than that. So Google that, because it's been a hot 7 years since I studied that. But calling it junk to me is like, it breaks my heart because I'm like, so what happens when we activate those different things? Like, what is the potentiality if we say that our DNA carries the blueprint for who we are, which is true to a certain extent, right? And of course, it gets influenced by the environment. What happens when we activate that junk DNA? Right. And we know that in energetic fields, we talk about solar codes, right? And in theta healing, we have DNA activation exercises when we can activate certain genes that haven't been activated through energetic means, which is really not that hard because if we think of a DNA molecule, it's connected by hydrogen bonds. And hydrogen bonds are relatively weak, so they're quite easy to break. Like the energy needed to break hydrogen bonds, right, is not the same as breaking covalent bonds between, let's say, I don't know, metals, metallic bonds, or so on. So with focused enough, large enough amounts of energy, you could change those. So I think that's a whole other field that's also very interesting, which is then the question, what is human potential? I think one of the most beautiful things about doing this work and being in the energetic fields is seeing that our potential is much, much, much less limited to what we were taught. And, first, I feel like it starts with a whole thing. The narrative 60 years ago was that genes determine your life, right? Then we learned about epigenetics. And we learned that actually it's the environment that affects the genes. And just having a gene doesn't necessarily mean anything. And now with energy healing, you go a step further and you're like, actually, energetically, we can even change some of those genes and like repair them in a targeted way. And then the step further is like, and we can activate new ones, right? How cool is that? So I think there's this whole other spectrum of like that we are walking on of seeing what is actually possible. Like, what are the actual limitations of being human? Are there limitations to being human, right? How do these limitations change as we evolve? And I think science is catching up. It has a lot of research that supports a lot of these things, like from quantum physics. We know we've shown a lot of the things that are true that people have been saying for thousands of years, like everything's connected. We have proof of that now, right? But the other thing is a lot more. And I think one thing is going to be the development of methodologies and techniques that allow us to go there. And then the other thing is simply going to be the willingness to even consider that, because the way the scientific method works, which is really you have a hypothesis and you work with that, you cannot prove a hypothesis if you're not allowing yourself to look at it. And I think right now science is at a breaking point where a lot of people are it's too important to them to prove themselves, and they're too stuck in the fight or flight because of just how the whole system works and of the indoctrination and belief systems to allow themselves to go into this just pure space of expansion. But I think as that starts to soften, and it is softening, we're going to see the spiritual and scientific worlds really come together. And I'm very excited to witness that. And there are institutes who do that, like the Heart Math Institute, right? But I think these two worlds are starting to collide, and I think it's high time for that. And it's beautiful.
Another full body goosebumps, girl. It's for real. So I call them truth bumps, like not goosebumps, truth bumps. Like you can't really fake them unless like there's a cold breeze coming through. Like that's just an energetic response to the information that your voice is carrying and your energy and your consciousness. And so it's so beautiful to just witness that and witness your perspective on that. And I find it fascinating. I getting distracted because there's a hornet in here.
Oh, spicy.
Yeah. So yeah, he's good though. He's good. But anyhow, we have like these people who are out there in the world that are really indoctrinated into the science and in their own beliefs. And like you said, their ego identity is wanting to prove their particular theories. And I feel like if we're not in science, we have not immersed ourselves in academia. We don't know that. And then we have, like they said, the opposite side of we're trying to use the science that we can grasp to prove this as alternative practitioners. And I will just say, anyone out there that's been trying to seek more information and validation for, yes, I hear a lot of people say everything is energy, but then you have this like cynicism of the people who are like, well, that's not really, who are you talking to? This person's not academic. I could say you're probably one of the only 3 people in my lifetime that I've spoken to who is academically sound and has this background, but also now has this awareness of the crossover. It's really interesting. I don't know how many more people are out there, probably many, but I find it like exciting beyond belief because I could talk to people that I'm like, okay, they get this topic, they understand it, but can they really validate it to the nerdiness degree I want to go into? Like, can you tell me more? Like, I'd love to kind of go back to the beginning. But before we go there, I want to touch on the topic of genetics and the potential for humans to potentially shift the way that our genes are expressing. because we need to start back at the beginning. Like, how is our subconscious mind and our conscious mind, programmed? How does this work within us? Because we may, all of us listening may be at a different part on our journey in expanding that. But first, I wanted to share, like, for someone who's not aware of genetic expression and what that potentially shows up, because I know that it affects our physical health, but also our personalities. People may not know that, and it could affect the way that our personalities show up. And I'm always curious, you said hydrogen bonds are easier to break. What is possible to shifting? And we don't know necessarily, but what is possible for shifting genetics? We know that exposure to X-rays and radiation can do that and other harmful things. But what about non-harmful things like energy medicine, sound frequencies? What kind of things are possible there? So I want to dive into that and get your background, your perspective on that, because I'm so curious. And then we can dive into the basis foundation of how we're programmed.
Yeah. And actually, that can be a really nice bridge because we can do both. So, okay, full disclosure, I'm not a physicist, I'm not a chemist, and it's been a hot second since I did those things. So just like, maybe I'm not the best person to talk about it, but let's go into it, but take it with a grain of salt, okay? I'm just going to say that.
Thank you.
So yes, 100%. I'm very mindful of, when you do science, you really understand that like there is a level of expertise that's needed. And just to like say quickly before, I truly do, it's a very tough line to walk because, for me, if you ask me to read, like I would say I am a good neuroscientist. Like I know how to read papers, but honestly, if you give me something from a discipline slightly adjacent, I will need some time to get into it. If you give me a particle physics paper, yeah, it's going to be Chinese to me, right? So that's what's hard as well about this, because when you don't have people who are open on the other side, like discussing these things, scientists, and oftentimes it will be unwillingness, right? That then you cannot have those conversations. And again, it's like alternative and Western medicine. We need people from all sides coming and having these conversations. But so
one thing I'll share that I'm really curious what will happen, because AI doesn't necessarily have an ego. If AI can be scouring for all these research documentations and taking things and making connections that maybe even the scientists don't have either the awareness, the expanded kind of connecting the dots perception to see how these all things connect. I'm really curious with what's possible with AI and taking a lot of concepts and saying, how do these all connect for us?
Yeah. And I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, with the AI, we're all really going to see how it goes, right? Because AI is trained by humans. So AI, as we know, is racist. Like, I'm just going to put it out there.
Yes, it is.
So that we got to understand there are limitations as with every system. But I definitely think there's a potential for it. And AI, as with everything else, it's a tool. If it's going to be used with the right intention, it can create a lot of beauty. If it's abused, well, we see what's happening in Palestine. It's abused. So, yeah. So what we know, let's see where we go. Oh, there are many avenues to go with this. So first of all is the thing we talked about. So let's just go like DNA 101 and basics, right? It's a molecule that has genes on it. So genes are simply stretches of the DNA molecule, which resides in the nucleus. And these genes create proteins, and proteins is what forms our body. That's basically, it's kind of how it creates the whole blueprint. Now, each type of a cell in your body has different genetic expression. So what it means is it's all the same DNA. So a gene to be expressed, it means that it's making a protein, right? So a liver cell will be making different proteins than a brain cell, than a kidney cell, or than a fat cell, right? And which genes are expressed and which proteins are made will be dependent. It's dependent on what type of a cell it is. So part of it is developmental, and part of it is what environment are they on. So this is a huge part. It's what signals are they receiving, right? And that's huge. This is how we know, the food that you eat, it affects this. A lot of people go with like the basics are the diet and the exercise and yada, yada, yada. Like we know that, if you eat a lot of inflammatory foods, it's not good for you, right? And that's because it upregulates, it makes inflammatory genes go up, right? So they make more proteins. That's kind of how it works. So the first question we already have is, can we regulate which proteins are expressed and then what's happening in our body? Everybody can do this. Now, what we know as well is, and it gets a lot more complicated than that, because one avenue would be to looking as well, this is the part we talked about before. What happens if there are other genes that are simply not activated, right? That are not making proteins, right? And what affects that as well is how the DNA molecule is shaped. So how it's coiled together. Because you can have a certain gene, and this is the thing that's cool, right, with epigenetics. You can have a gene, let's call it the gene for obesity, okay, for the sake of like simplicity. But if you have the right environment of the gene, which involves also emotions, right? Not just the physical, the DNA may keep it kind of like coiled together. So it's not making a protein. So you're good, right? We know that I think only about 2% of diseases are what we call them like dominant. So that means that if you have that gene, you will have a disease. The vast majority of diseases and the vast majority of genes are recessive, right? And it's lifestyle dependent, right? We know we have those examples of twins that have twin studies are big for that. They will both have the same genetics, but they have very different, let's say, health outcomes or whatnot because their lifestyles are different. So that's the first thing we need to understand with this. And a lot of people know this already. So then there's the whole question of what starts happening when we begin to activate other parts of DNA. And quite frankly, this is where we're going to touch on theta healing, because one thing is, again, looking at the physical DNA. But of course, again, science doesn't talk about that. There is a morphogenetic field around the DNA. And this is where a lot of information is stored. This is where genetic belief systems are stored that get passed down from our ancestors. So when we shift that field, again, energy influences matter, things start changing, right? Changing very rapidly.
Could we, is there an analogy that would make sense? And I don't know if this does, but if we have our modem, which is the receiver of like our Wi-Fi and our internet data, would you consider the Wi-Fi and the information that's floating through the air to be a similar thing to the morphogenetic field? Would that be a similar analogy to explain that? I'm curious what might be a good...
I think that would make sense. Yeah, I think of the brain in the same way. I think of the brain wave is a receptor for consciousness, and it interprets energy. That's what we know, right? Like, what is vision? It's how our brain interprets light coming in. And I think here is the same, right? We know that if you do theta healing, as you change this morphogenetic field information, things will sometimes shift in the body, right? You can sometimes heal a disease that way. So there is a lot of potential. Like, knowing exactly what's going on there, it's going to take someone who's highly intuitive and can really see these things as science. But that's a whole other thing of what happens when we change the information that the DNA is receiving. And I have talked to people as well who are saying you have all these energetic DNA strands, right? It's not just the two strands that are physical, but what's happening around it. And they all interplay, right? Just like how long did it take for science to start accepting that the mind and emotions actually affect the body? Like, I can't tell you how many times I laughed so hard because and sometimes I was also just very frustrated because the laboratory I worked in, was working towards the end of the mind body connection. And there was this whole thing that started coming out and people were like, oh my God, there's this thing called the vagus nerve. And what that means is that what's happening in the gut affects the brain. And I just remember sitting through the meetings, sipping my tea. And I was like, yeah, we've known this for 5,000 years. Like, can we move on? Right. But like, that's where some things are at, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So then there's one whole other thing. And for anyone who wants to nerd out on that, I recommend looking at the field of quantum biology. And quantum biology is really looking at like how light and sound and these things affect our biology and how this gets transmitted through our fascial networks and how the structured water in our body stores and transmits information. And that affects everything, right? Because we really need to understand everything in our body is connected like everything else. Like, hormones affect the genetic expression, right? Everything that gets to the nucleus, and hormones are affected by everything happening. So there's like this whole matrix. But another area that's very interesting is looking at mitochondria, right? And mitochondria have their own DNA. And mitochondria, we know, are affected by sound. For example, they emit infrared light inside. We know that there are light receptors in the parts of the body where there is no light reaching them. So there are a lot of these other avenues that are kind of a little bit fringe still, maybe, or in the early stages, that are really, I think, starting to bring together how the unseen is interacting with the seen. So yeah, I mean, and I'm sure they're like, for mitochondria and all this, I know there are some very cool studies showing that, if you play heavy metal songs, like, they really decrease effectiveness of mitochondrial function. But some of these, like, let's say solfeggio musics or even like classical music, improves the function of mitochondria. And of course, what are mitochondria? They're the energy creators of the body, right? So they're the source of energy. So if we're thinking about the, energetic element of us and who creates that on the physical level, that gets influenced by the light, sound, by all of these things. So there's a lot we know in terms of that. Like, that's also very much grounded in science at this point. I think bringing it all together is now what some people who are working on this are really, really working. And there's some brilliant people in the space of quantum biology who are working also now with, looking at the ether. So the space between the atoms, right? The unseen, and how the vibrations there influence. So I think it's exciting times, very, very exciting times.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that this is like, sometimes for people, it's so new to them. Like, wait a minute. Like, I know I need to work on my stress levels or my anxiety or my emotional component. Like, there's that awareness. And I mean, I want to take away the shame or guilt related to it. Cause like, if you're kind of like processing this, like, oh my gosh, I'm affecting my genetic code or what are these ladies saying? I don't know what to do now, like, so I feel like we need to, of course, like be gentle with ourselves and know like, this is part of like the human evolution. I mean, look at all the things in the past that we didn't know. And now we know. We're like, wow, okay, we're going to get asbestos out of people's homes. And like, these things are toxic and these things are good. And I think that going back to where we start with, how does the brain start to form and how does the unconscious, subconscious mind and the conscious mind really affect our programming and any limitations as we go forward with being in more of that fight or flight, that black and white thinking, and how that affects our expansion and even or out to this world equality and oneness.
Oh, I mean, there's a reason that after 7 years, I landed with working with pretty much exclusively subconscious reprogramming. I see it really as a root cause. And I really believe at this stage, and that may change with time, honoring our own journey, it is the root cause. Because think of your body and think of your brain as the hardware, right? It's like you're having a computer and you have some wiring, you have some things that work together. When you're born, it gets switched on and all of this. But what's the software, right? And the software are belief systems. The software are these things that either get installed, quote unquote, into us, mostly during the first 10 years of our life, right? Although it can be later. But the first 10 years of our life, our brain is in the right frequency, this theta brainwave, which is a coordinated neuronal activity. So across the whole brain, neurons, the neural cells are firing synchronously at this frequency between 4 and 7 hertz. So that's theta. And that's the realm of the subconscious. So in that phase, you're absorbing everything as a sponge. Like kids don't question, They are like, they see their parents act one way, and they're like, okay, that's how it's done, Which is why children, there are a lot of things, I think, when we start shifting into more conscious parenting, our world is going to start changing very, very quickly, because that is, such a big part of the equation. So then we learn a lot of things. And basically what that time teaches us is effectively, how do we stay alive? What is necessary for us to survive? And I'm not talking here surviving just in terms of, food and drink and all of those things, but for kids to survive, they need to belong. They need to be accepted by their parents, right? And so they learn all of these mechanisms of like, what does it take for me to be loved, right? Whatever the expression of love is from their parents. So it's a very sensitive time. And I really applaud everybody who's teaching these days how to parent differently, because that's going to really, really change our planet. So that's one area. Now, on the other hand, it's also important to understand that belief systems can come from elsewhere. We can bring them from past lives. So the alternative dimensions of where our soul exists, that on the linear timescale would exist in the past, can also be in the future, which people don't talk as much about. And that's normally, I know.
I'm sorry, no, because I always, just quick segue here or squirrel break, like down a rabbit hole. This is what I share with people. I don't believe in past lives. I feel like it's more of like, there's no such thing as time, and it's only in this body that we perceive it as. So why is it not happening simultaneously in the no time existence of all? And then like completely like, be like, huh?
And this is, and these may be conversations that are just, I don't want to call them too advanced. Like that's not, because again, as you said, there's no hierarchy, but is the next level of understanding different. Our souls are multidimensional. Like it's not that my soul is like only here in like one body now. And it's like,
yes.
Spanning such huge, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, for those of you who were on the live, we had a past life reader we did for our community. She was doing past life readings, quote unquote past life readings, and she looked at me and she said, well, you actually are living 9 interdimensional lives. And she just went into this whole thing, and I'm just shaking my head and yes, and goosebumps. Like, I know this, and it's just so funny because I had never experienced a practitioner at that point who was like talking about it in that way. It was more of this another way of thinking in the spiritual world of that journey on milestone of consciousness of its past, present, future, which is still valid for that particular part of the journey. It's not wrong. It's just that's what you perceive in that particular frequency or bandwidth of consciousness.
Exactly. And, again, it's important to understand that when we go on the spiritual journey, there can be this rejection of the body, right? And what comes with the body, I'm not just saying like we're trying to escape into the ether, although that's true sometimes. Our brain's not designed to perceive multidimensionality. That's the realm of the soul. So this linear experience is how we're designed to experience ourselves now. But it's cool to know that things are a little bit more complicated than that. And it's just a very different perspective. This is a very interesting part when we work with Theta because, yes, you work on beliefs, but one thing you can work on is oaths and obligations, which is different. And that can be, for example, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and I will test them. And some people have an obligation to poverty because if in one of the additional timelines, they're a monk or a nun, and in the linear time in the past on planet Earth, they normally took an oath to poverty. And those are different because you don't replace them. You complete them in this lifetime. So you're allowing them out there because you say, hey, my soul on a different timeline is still learning these lessons. So the oath is staying here, but for this timeline, I'm completing it. So it's taking really into account this like multidimensionality, which I think is so freaking cool. But yeah, I mean, it's like, and this is all affecting us. We're carrying these imprints. And there is also the element of the linear time in the sense that, our ancestors for 7 generations back, we can carry their beliefs on the genetic level. And that's the body related part, right? Because we are inheriting our bodies from our ancestors. And the DNA carries in this morphogenetic field around us these beliefs that they had. And those are huge, like monumental when you start working with them. So we have the core level is that in the childhood. That's called the core level. Then the second level is the genetic, comes from our ancestors. Then the third level is history level, it's called. And history level can encompass, let's call them past lives for the sake of it. But it can also encompass the collective subconscious. So it can absorb things from elsewhere, right? Or it can encompass beliefs that come from ancestors past 7 generations. So really, really far back. And then last one is the soul level. And in Theta Healing, we understand that, some people teach that soul is untouchable. That's not really true. There are certain things that can go so deep that they touch the level of the soul. And those are really those deep, deep beliefs that are at the core of who we believe we are. So those can be very heavy, Some people can really have beliefs that like they're a bad person and it's at the soul level. And with entrepreneurs, that's going to hold you back. Like if you're an ethical person, if you have a belief you're a bad person, you will not share your services, right?
Yeah.
So there are those like 4 different beliefs that we have in Theta Healing that are all kind of interplaying, and certain beliefs can be carried on 1 of them or 2 of them or 3 of them or all of them sometimes. And they're very profound because important to understand is that each belief carries a frequency, right? So the interplay of energetics starts happening. And this is, when then laws of the universe come into place. Law of attraction is one of them, but there are many other laws of the universe, right? How does the external reality respond to the frequencies you're carrying? Because these frequencies and beliefs that you're carrying within create your identity. That's what your identity is. Dr. Joe Dispenza is one of those really big names, right? Who's doing energy work. And one of his famous things that he says is your personality creates your personal reality. Now, what is personality? That's the collection of beliefs you have about yourself, you have about the world, you have about what makes you safe here or doesn't make you safe. You have beliefs about what works and what doesn't work. And that's really going to inform how you think, how you feel, and how you act. And that, of course, creates your life. So that for me is when you start working with these belief systems and when you're starting to change this, yes, you're changing belief systems, but you're changing your frequency. They go hand in hand. So it's simultaneously an energetic work, and it is happening at the level of the neural connections. They do change as a part of that, but that's an element of it. That's matter, again, is always the end result of energy. So primarily here, we're working on shifting the energy, and that really allows the brain to rewire faster. That's the way I think about it. It makes it easier to then go and implement new habits, implement new ways of being, implement new ways of feeling, implement new ways of thinking, because you've taken away this like huge activation energy that before was not blocking you, but making it really hard to act in this new way. So that's how this works. And it's a really beautiful, it's such a huge, complex system of how all of these things work. It's incredible. Yeah.
I know that for this podcast, we're going into each of the episodes, we're going into a guest. And then we're usually having an episode that's talking about a particular story, a personal timeline story of the transition from a specific space in consciousness to expanding it, whether it's in a mind, body, or spirit perspective. And to give these anecdotal stories of like how this actually works. So you can kind of relate like, okay, all the stuff we're talking about, And, the example of myself having a particular belief as a child, well, who I am, that bases how I feel of myself in the world and how I think, act, I am. And that's really how I changed that. And everyone listening to this, you're working on changing that, or else you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. And I think that there's such a potential for not seeing how much, when you change something in yourself, how much it impacts the collective. Like serious, huge ripples can happen, even if they seem small. And so just touching on that brief story, this belief that I am not enough, this belief that I have, I have to be living in poverty. I have a horrible relationship. I have no friends. In my journey, as many of you have heard, or if not, you can go look back and listen to the episodes. Living in poverty, living with a baby daddy who didn't work. I'm working third shift as a mom, overgiver, overnurturer, 260 pounds, overweight, living in this space where I felt stupid. I was berated by a narcissistic partner, thinking that I'm not enough. Wait a minute. The first act of, I want to love myself better. I have this new baby who's amazing. I want to do better for myself in the world. And the first things that was started was mindset. It was mindset. It was the beliefs and the core of who I am, asking what more is possible to open up the potential for consciousness to expand. And then that takes me down where we're at now. We're not going to we're going to jump to here, but it just starts with that shift. And it's so powerful.
Yeah. If you don't believe something else is possible, you will stay where you are. People underestimate, how does change always begin? You decide it's going to happen and you believe it's possible. Otherwise, people don't go there. And how many people spend their lives, one of my coaches called it fighting for their limitations, really like finding all of these different excuses for why they cannot move forward. And the truth is that somewhere underlying that, there is a subconscious belief, right? That's impossible, right? Where that can be reprogrammed, that you open up possibilities. Or what we need to understand is, touching back on what we said before, what's happening in the first 10 years, the role of your subconscious is to keep you safe, right? That's really the one role it has. So I really want to break this narrative, because people are like, oh, the subconscious is this thing blocking you from where you're going to. Also, they painted like this little gremlin, in your mind that's there to what can I mess up today? And that's just not what is happening, right? The subconscious is trying to protect you. And so it's going to create this sometimes behaviors like procrastination, right? Freeze response and so on. Those are like big ones. A lot of entrepreneurs go through this, right? They're like, I said I would post on Instagram, but again, I didn't. And then you're like, but why didn't you, right? And then you start going down and you're like, oh, okay, you believe that you're going to be completely their beliefs, I'm going to be killed for speaking my truth. You would be surprised how common that is amongst healers. And
Absolutely.
Honestly, probably wouldn't be. Yeah, exactly. And then of course, if you have that belief, you're not going to go and speak about it, right? So we need to, and this is for me, doing belief work on myself and my clients. It has helped me to become so unbelievably non-judgmental and so compassionate towards myself and others, because you realize, to me, belief work is the embodiment of the cause-effect relationship, which is a law of the universe. There's always a cause-effect relationship between where you are and your beliefs. It's always there. Sometimes it takes a while to see it. Sometimes you got to be ready to see it. But there's a cause-effect relationship, that there's a frequency and then there's the outcome. And when you can start seeing this, you can start seeing that most people never said yes to those beliefs. And that includes the collective ones. That includes beliefs that are installed into us through the media. So let's look at post 9/11. All Arabs are terrorists. All Muslims are terrorists. Or Arab men are rapists. That's what we were implicitly told. And the technique I work with, we can muscle test ourselves for these beliefs. So the body can show you if you hold them, right? So this is not a technique where we're going and doing guesswork and some journaling around it. We go into the process of digging and then something comes up. And then I'm like, right, let's ask your body, is that there? And we can see very clearly, yes, no answer. And when we reprogram it, we can see, has it changed?
Has it solidified in you?
Exactly. And it's a beautiful thing, because sometimes beliefs backtrack. Sometimes you change it and then you come back to it a week again and it's gone back. And then you understand, you're like, okay, there's a deeper layer, right? Yes. And there really what comes there is you have to normally do feeling work. So one thing I love in the modality that I use is, we call it downloads, but really it's downloading feelings. And the reason we do this is that, you can come and test and you have certain beliefs. Let's say you have a belief, I'm unworthy and I'm not good enough. And we can go and replace this belief. But then most of the time what's going to happen is we retest it a week later and the belief is back. And what's going on there is that when we go and explore that person's childhood, you realize that perhaps you were growing up in an environment where you never actually felt good enough. So your body does not know the feeling and does not have the frequency in it. So we can go and we can download the feeling in order for you to have it. And oftentimes this feeling work actually shifts beliefs. So I would say 80% of the time, I don't even need to replace beliefs. We download the relevant feelings for people, and then the belief is gone. So that's a really, really powerful way we work with these things as well, right? So that's normally going to happen, what we're going to need if the belief is coming back. But the point is we can really systematically test all of those things. We can see, did it work? Did it not work? Which, the truth is always what we want to be working with, right? Like, did it happen? Okay, amazing. Did it not happen? Okay, we got work to do, right? So there's none of this guesswork. It takes it out of the game. But we really need to start understanding that collective change really happens, first of all, from within, and we all have to do the work. It's time we stop counting on the top-down systemic change to shift our reality. That hasn't worked and it won't work. And the reason why it won't work is because these frequencies and belief systems that created these systems in the first place that are not working are so predominant. Because so many people on this planet carry the belief that humans are worth more than nature, that humans are worth more than animals, that it's actually, anthropocentrism and utilitarianism, which are basically saying nature is only worth as much as it can do for a human, they wouldn't have developed if those beliefs weren't present. And those were implicitly indoctrinated into a lot of us. Unless you're coming from an indigenous community that actually had a genuine relationship with the land, you probably carry some of those beliefs. All of us carry beliefs about, I'm going to wager every single country, they have beliefs about the neighboring countries, right? Normally we don't like our neighbors. So I know I tested myself for a lot of these things. I was like, interesting, right?
Yeah.
I didn't say yes to any of that, but I'm carrying them.
Yeah.
There are a lot of, beliefs that have to do with what does it mean to be a man or a woman? Are men safe? Are men not safe? How do we teach the body it's possible? If there was any abuse, 8 out of 10 women, when you test them for programs of sexual abuse and violation, test positive. So either it was them or their ancestors that went through this. They carry these things. So, when we're starting to talk about why, honestly, so that we have so few sexually liberated people, let alone, the Catholicism, Christianity, indoctrination, right? Of course, it makes freaking sense. So the way we shift these things is that we uproot these beliefs and, I would say, find ways to have genuine experience of interconnectedness. Teach ourselves to feel worthy. Teach ourselves, what does it feel like to have a community? What does it feel like to be connected to the earth? What does it feel like to be supported by something greater than us? This is where getting out of fight or flight response is really, really big. I would wager essential, because when we're in the fight or flight, we're only looking at survival. And survival and social connection are mutually exclusive. That's not how the nervous system works. But we have to start looking at, why are we even operating in this way? Why are we constantly disconnected? Why do we believe that's the way forward? Why are we okay with this? And the easiest way to do this is to look at what's happening on the outside, because that's always the reflection of the frequency. Again, matter comes from frequency, from energy. So what we're observing collectively is the result of our collective frequency. And that is formed by our collective belief systems. And then we need to find ways to uproot that. And that can be done in different ways. I found Theta Healing the fastest. We can also do it through conscious reprogramming, where we really are incredibly aware of where those beliefs are coming up. It's a bit of a slower process, works as well, but we cannot move forward without doing this work.
Yes.
We cannot moving forward without doing this work. And the more I observe at what's happening in the world, and I think right now, if it's ever been out in the open, the emperor has no clothes. Everybody can see it. If you want to see it, you will see it now. So for me, this is the path forward. And I'm just really excited to bring work to the world that's going to actually support individuals start to reprogram these things and honor the experiences of oppressed people. Honor the experiences of others, so we get off of our high throne and we can create these programs where we can all share experiences. We can see the truth. That's the really thing, the truth of what's been going on, without judgment, understanding we all have beliefs. We all have biases. We all have prejudice. We were indoctrinated. We didn't say yes to them. Doesn't mean you're a bad person if you have those beliefs. It's very neutral, but we can change them. So let's do that. And let's actually create a different world together.
Yeah, absolutely. This feeling that we have collectively that we're alone. That is an interesting thing, that it's not only because I've always watched The Collective. I always find that a really interesting barometer of where we're at. And I get excited as we're moving forward because I'm going, for me, this sense of feeling alone was more so the collective human. I'm a human, but where are the humans that understand and relate to the consciousness in which I operate? I can still connect to their consciousness and get it. I totally get that fight or flight. You get mad, you get angry, resentful, but I just don't, it's not my preference. So that's one of the only kind of bandwidths I was able to connect and feel that connection to humans. Animals, easy. Plants, easy, because they're in the space of natural, they're not indoctrinated, they're not programmed. And the first time I set foot on some of these native lands where there's more connection to the history has not been colonized or more only recently colonized. So there's still an imprint on that land, like the native Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah.
There is lots of horror, terror, what they've done to the Hawaiian people, just like any other indigenous culture. Let's just take your land and let's take over your culture. And now you have to speak English and these things we don't even know. Americans don't know that about Hawaii. They go there as their destination tourist retreat. Like, we're going to go get married here. And they don't understand. Like, but then they have this feeling like something there is so amazing. The consciousness of the land is alive. It's like, because the people living there were in harmony, all oneness, not aloneness, you know, with the people and with the land and with the animals and with the water. It's in every indigenous culture, we have that. And I think that uprooting and this awareness that we all are experiencing aloneness, there's an epidemic of loneliness, at least in the United States. I don't know if it's global now. Like, that's the collective. And so is this experience of the aloneness, is it the call to go within? It forces you to be inside, because is that what we need for this kind of collective dark night, that everyone's having these waking up experiences that are really scary for people? They don't know how to reach out. And because one of the biggest buoys is reaching out into the collective, into a safe space. And, you know, maybe not everyone knows where to find that if they can't find it within themselves yet. So
Yes, 100%. And this is really, we did a beautiful tarot reading with a friend of mine yesterday who is really, really gifted tarot reader. And we did it for like the collective of what's unfolding. And the first card that was pulled was the Hermit. And those who know the meaning of this card, it's signifying kind of the beginning of this spiritual journey. And it's about really going within and disconnecting from the world, right? Going like the hermit, going out into, let's say, nature and contemplating things, like going within. But the way it came up within the context of the rest of the spread is disconnect from the matrix. Find your own truth. Go within. And this is what's happening. People are starting to see, I mean, as I said, the emperor has no clothes. Everything's becoming apparent. People are realizing that the media are lying. The systems are not designed to actually support anyone apart from keeping the status quo. And people are finding their own truth. And right now at this stage, we are at the massive up-leveling of consciousness. We all need to do that. It's time. We need to collectively go within. We need to see the truth of why did we end up where we are? How do we all contribute? Like, take absolutely radical
responsibility.
Absolutely. No questions asked, no time for victim complex, no time for like, oh, but this. We don't need to judge. It's not, like, you're not responsible for the belief systems you carry, but your soul has chosen to incarnate here to transcend them. So honor that as well. And you have the tools, and you will be shown the path, and you will be given the tools to do that yourself if you desire to do so. Ask and you shall receive. The path will be shown to you. And I believe every listener of this podcast, every single one of us who is interested in these topics, we have been called to do that. We have been called to transcend the stale, outdated ways of beings, because the new world is coming, whether or not we want it. And some people are fighting with all they have to prevent that, but they can't. It's done. Yeah. And so the question is just, how do we individually, what is the path for each of us to bring this new world into reality? What is our medicine here? How are we meant to show up and share it? And there are infinite ways, unique as many as there are humans out there. But I really do believe it's time for all of us to rise to the calling of that happening, because the calling has been made. We are called to rise up to that. And that's what we're seeing right now. And it's heartbreaking, it's painful, and it's deeply beautiful.
Yeah. And I will just add that doing this work is doing it internally for you. That is where the power that ripples it out to others. We can't get lost anymore trying to save other people, because it's actually trying to save ourselves, which you're going to continue perpetuating that cycle of saving all the animals and saving your friends and saving your parents. Oh, why are they not doing this? Why are they still getting caught up in the media and the programming? The energy doesn't need to be spent there.
It's a leak. It's a
yeah,
leak.
and you will continue to hit burnout and continue to hit all the emotions and you'll feel like you're spinning your wheels because that's not where you're supposed to go. Like I say, this wounded healer archetype, this is a milestone that you wake up, you have this, I need to heal. Oh my gosh. And then we kind of hit this brick wall after a while. We're like, we're trying to heal everyone else and no one seems to be listening and no one's actually doing it. Or if they do it, then there's this energetic dynamic of parasitism and then they're pulling upon me and they're feeding off of my love instead of doing their, no. That's what I think also needs to happen at this time to actually make some progress in the collective of actually shifting it is actually doing the work with us. This hermit energy. I love that the tarot pull you guys did is like totally reflecting what I'm seeing. Yeah, absolutely. And our astrologer, she's fantastic. She's been doing it for 55 years and she's so spot on. She predicted COVID and she's so humble. She wouldn't even be like, oh, and I'm like, she's just so tapped into the collective and how it's happening. She goes, look, in a year, next year, the next 2 years, it's going to be a very rude awakening wake-up call because we're moving from this age of Pisces. Again, we've retrograded back and this Pluto whole transit thing, we're moving back into this age of Aquarius. And that's when this is the final showdown for misuse of power in spiritual traditions of you have a guru and the teacher who's going to tell you, or these big religious cults or people who are making a lot of money in these mega churches and they're not actually giving you any spiritual power of your own. They're emptying your wallets. And there is absolutely, I'm sure, beautiful spaces out there that are doing great jobs, that are great people, but where is this power that we're creating? Where this is shifting and the people who are going to cling to it and say, well, that's all just, conspiracy. And there is absolutely fear-mongering, basic ideas of how the world's working right now. And we shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. If it's causing a fear response in you, and creating more separation, I would always question that because it's putting you back into this fight or flight space. And I think that doesn't expand your ability at least from a brain perspective, to actually see expanded views of consciousness and what's possible.
I agree. I mean, I think there's nuance and subtlety to each of those, right? Because I think it's important to understand a few things that it is, however, still important. Well, we don't want to go into the duality of saying us versus them and putting those people are bad, right?
Yes.
However, that does not mean not choosing sides ever, because what you choose in life defines who you are. You're making a choice every moment, because I've seen a lot of spiritual people can very easily go into apathy, right? And I'm an activist. I'm very active in those spaces. They're like, we're not going to choose a side because they're just causing more division. And I'm like, but what's the consciousness you're choosing? What's the frequency you're choosing, right? And this is something that is important. So we are always making a choice. Every single thing in your life you do, you're choosing a side, quote unquote. However, that does not mean you're saying, no, I hate those people and those people are bad, right? Then you're buying into the narrative or duality. But you're simply saying, what is the consciousness, the frequency we no longer choose? And sometimes that means fighting it, right? Because if that side is fighting, if that side is murdering, yeah, it ain't going to go away just by you sitting there twiddling your thumbs, right? So I think that is just a quick narrative to bring in, because it's a trap, quote unquote, I've seen a lot of people fall into when they're very much into me, myself, and I, it's just my healing. And your healing is important, but don't go into, spiritual narcissism. You are part of the collective. No one is healed until everyone is healed. No one is free until everyone is healed. And how does your medicine, while it can serve you, and that's beautiful, how does it also free the rest of the world? How does it liberate others? How does it help uphold life as a whole? And this, I think, is the question we need to start asking, because if we don't do this, we're not honoring the timeless, basic bitch spirituality 101 principle, all is one. And then we should be always coming from that. So I think it's an important thing, and understanding this is the duality. This is the path you're working with. How are you honoring yourself? How are you honoring the collective? Because if all is one, it's time to love all. And what would love do? How does love walk? How does love speak, right? And there are many facets of it. Again, conversations for itself. But so this is, I think, really the time right now that is calling it is heal yourself so that you can heal the world, and both go hand in hand.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a really beautiful, I would say, an expansion on the definition of what I call radical love. And that's kind of my highest value, because it is true that if we're in the spiritual community and we're feeling that we are needing to be a people pleaser or be loving, and that we can't be mean or boundaried, or obviously being mean isn't always the kindness, but sometimes you have to be firm and you have to
Yes.
be like, this is not love. Like if you don't choose a side, if you really hold love as the highest value, that's why I'm calling it radical, because it
Yes.
may seem like I had to set some boundary with it. And I'll just share a quick thing. There was a gentleman that came to see us at an expo recently, and he came up to me and he was in a space of consciousness where he said, "Do you know energy?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Do you know energy?" And I'm there as a reader, for my job. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, "Well, let me show you. Let me hold your hand. I want to show you what it is." And I was like, okay, I see where he's at in his consciousness. He really wants to hold the space of, I'm so valuable because I can feel and give energy. And I know about crystals. And I was like, oh my gosh, this beautiful man's having the amazing, like, he's so happy and he's found this, but he's also feeling a sense of this deep sense of, I'm not enough. And I want to prove to you that I'm enough. And he said he was these specific labels in the training he's had. And I looked at him, I said, "You are so much more valuable than even the labels and which you're identifying with. I hope you know that." And not any question or let me just tell you that your ego is doing this thing. This is not battling. This is radical love. But he wanted to get into my space and wanted to touch my body. And I said, that's not for me. It didn't feel in a space of love. It was really beautiful. I love to be able to have this opportunity to hold strong boundaries in a radical way that to the other healers in the area, they thought, oh my gosh, like she's being really like not love and light. I said, actually, this is love. I am not allowing this type of conversation when he started to get aggressive with me because he was coming from a place of fear. But then we sat down. I said, "Tell me more about your journey." And by the end of the show, he was like, "See you later. It was really nice meeting you." When there was this whole,
Yeah.
at first, this kind of contrast of his ego identity really trying to kind of get in my space and be throwing around his fear. And I was just holding his fear with so much love, but saying, "Look, I don't want you to touch my body. Like I'm
Yeah.
energetically sensitive to that. And that frequency right now is not something that's not a preference. I'm not judging it as bad or good, but it's not a preference for me. That is the radical choice I have to make for me to stay in this frequency so I can continue to maybe get to a point where I can hold your hand in a space of consciousness and not affect me. But I'm not there yet, and that's okay." So I just wanted to reiterate that because it is important, like I said, to focusing on healing yourself. Everyone is a reflection of that. Not abandoning people or ignoring, like you said, going in this narcissistic self-healing journey, but recognizing when your energy is being taken and utilized versus it may just be draining your energy because that's not love. And it's enabling other people to not have to focus and get in gear and make actions and choices to love themselves versus you doing it for them by trying to help or heal or save them. I'm saying, this whole year is hashtag hold space, not hands. Hold space, not hold hands. You don't have to hold anyone's hand. You hold the space for them by holding space for you. So yeah.
100%.
Well, I want to know more about how we can find out about your work, working with you, because I know even if people are not entrepreneurs out there, we need this and we need it in a way that which you are not doing the guesswork. You are being able to muscle test for it and go back. Because I think that's the one thing people miss when they feel like I'm not doing the law of attraction right or whatever. It's like, you could have changed it for a week, your belief or your perspective, and your identity shifted a little bit, but then it went backwards. So share a little bit more about how we can learn more about your work and dive right in.
Yes, it would be my pleasure. So the main place to connect with me is on Instagram. For now, I am expanding my platform, so more will be to come. But if you would like that, find me, and my handle is Dr.Alja Podgornik. It's going to be the show notes instead of going to spelling this out because it's very Slavic. So follow me there. If you have any questions or anything, I always read and respond to all my messages myself, so you can reach out there. For everybody else who is an entrepreneur interested in reprogramming subconscious beliefs, I really recommend I have a beautiful freebie you can get there, which is a whole little mini course where you get to experience theta healing for subconscious or reprogramming for some of the specific beliefs that have to do with your ability to succeed as an entrepreneur. And then you get also on my email list where I send out weekly updates. And for anyone else who wants to follow my work and is interested in what's coming further down the line, so hopefully in a year or so with subconscious reprogramming, just jump into like the Instagram space. I also post things that have to do with decolonizing spirituality and other things with limiting beliefs and so on that are broader. So I think there's going to be also some pretty good things found there for you. So I would love you in my space. I would love to connect with you, and everyone we can do to do this work together is such a treasure in this time and space.
Very great. Well, before I go into the final two questions that we ask all of our guests for the first time on the episodes, what else do you want to share that maybe we didn't share, or any questions we didn't go over but you really want to have space to voice?
I think just one thing I'm going to elaborate on that's coming up, we talked about, is I really think it's important each of us really honors our own journey where we are and seek community within this. Find people that you can connect with instead of going into the space of, I need to fix the world to feel okay myself. Find people who can support you on the journey of really becoming the most aligned version of you, and know that that's enough. And know that what's happening in your life, there's always the root cause for it. It can always be changed, and shame and guilt are never a part of it. Because I think a lot of people are still fighting with that.
Yeah, that's one for me. The shame and guilt have been very much in so many different areas too, that I'm like,
Yes.
oh, it's out of this particular area of my life, but now it's in this area. So it is like this constant unraveling. And obviously be aware when you compare, because other people's journey is different. Like you said, you don't have to compare your measuring stick to where they're at. It has nothing to do with you. Stay in your
Yes.
own lane.
In your
That's
own
what I think
lane.
gets us distracted. It gets us distracted.
100%. And comparison is so big. And really, guilt is a purely conditioned emotion. Emotions such as fear, emotions such as anger, emotions such as, of course, love, joy, and so on, they have actually physiological functions, right? Guilt doesn't. It's conditioned. You can live your life without ever feeling guilt again, and nothing is going to go wrong for you. Because if you don't have fear, if you don't have pain, if you don't have anger, you don't know how to protect your boundaries. You don't know when you remove yourself from the situation. Guilt, you've never needed it, ever. And some people put out this narrative of you needed to know when you're out of integrity. But there's a possibility of knowing when you're out of integrity without guilt and changing because, there's a better thing available, not because you're running away from this horrible feeling. So that's just a little thing sprinkled in there.
That's perfect. I love that. Thank you. There's so many beautiful little sound bites that I'm going to be popping out of this amazing interview. So our last two questions, and I always ask people for the very first episode they're with us. What is your favorite self-care routine, product, or topic right now that you are just really loving and just bringing into your being with so much joy?
So I would say 3 from the very physical routines. One of them is Theta, because going to Theta brainwave has so many incredible effects on the brain, the nervous system, neurotransmitters, and so on. That's just bliss. But the 3 that for me, are a big part of self-care are movement. I'm a boulderer. I do a lot of other things, and it's very important. Sauna, I love it. And grounding.
Do you do an infrared sauna or just a traditional
traditional sauna, looking to upgrading to infrared, but not really at the stage where this is possible, just given where I am. But traditional sauna regularly, and combined with cold exposure. So that's been just incredible. Oh, also acupuncture. That's been amazing. Acupuncture has been phenomenal. I've had incredible results with it. So if anyone's thinking about that, give it a go. And grounding. I would say every single human being right now, go put your bare feet on the ground or a hand, bare skin on a natural material that's connected to the ground. So that could be a tree. There are also certain materials that work with that, like concrete or wood. But if you can do that every day, even if it's 30 seconds, it's going to really, really help you right now with the nervous system, which I would recommend because energetically things have been pretty intense and will continue to be so for a little while.
I had this meme the other day someone shared as a picture of Ra, and it says, solar flares will continue until morale improves.
Yes.
It's okay. That's hilarious. I love that.
I feel that's you're kind of laughing, but then goes into crying if you're an energy sensitive person because oh no.
Yeah. I think it's continuing to find my resilience with, oh, here comes another solar wave, or here comes another potential Schumann frequency spike. And it is this, it's a journey of consciousness, shifting here. And it's how do you come back to central point? And I feel it's almost it's a personal training, it's a gym. It's an energy gym. Get back to central point. Who are you? Where are you in this body and space and time? Yes, you're feeling the collective shifts and you're oh, it's sad, it's grief and anger now. And that's all collective reflection of me, of us all. But I'm how do I bring back to the central point of all being one, And it's challenging, but I do find it to be this personal training energy gym.
Oh, yeah. And, then there's just the human functioning of how they handle this and run a business.
Exactly. But I know before we ask the final question, gosh, I have one more thing. I wanted to bring it back. When you said at the very beginning of the episode, you're talking about people who are in positions of power and authority in our world, right? And like what would it be, if we had these empathic, caring people of integrity in positions of power? I just wanted to reflect that one more time. I know it's kind of just popcorn in here at the end, but I can't tell you how much that's like my main focus as well. What would happen, if we were able to have these boundaries? And that's why I think working with someone like you is, I don't even want to say this, but I feel like it's a non-negotiable. If you are like, I'm here for a purpose, like doing something like this, why is it questioned? Like something that really is going to make a big difference, because you can't fight all these systems and these programs. You can't. It's about moving past them so we can really to step into these positions of power and integrity.
You need to find a practice that's going to help you speed up the process. And today you have access to it. And, I'm going to say, if you're feeling drawn to doing Theta Healing work, find a Theta Healing practitioner, contact me. There are many of us out there. But there are other things, like doing yoga, kriya, something like this. You have so many modalities that can help you speed up the process. And, you're going to feel what's right for you. But there are a lot of people out there right now who are having this feeling of time's running out. And while that can be a program, while that can be an urgency programming, there's also the truth right now in the collective that we are at the edge where we have to do the work. Like, we don't have time to be faffing about. Like, the planet's on fire, y'all. Like, we have a genocide 1 going over there, genocide 2 going over 3. Like, it's time, and we see it. So if you're feeling this, go find support. Get rid of those programs that are just outdated, because that's as simple as it is. They're outdated. They served you at some point, so that you can move differently through life. You can shift your frequency quickly, and you can be the authority, the leader, the change maker, the visionary you came here to be. And you don't have to wait until you're 70. I used to think that I would have my first ayahuasca retreat when I would be like maybe 55, 60. I had it when I was 18. It's cool. So these are beautiful, beautiful modalities that can really help you speed things up. And I think there are a lot of people who are ready for that. And I think, yes, the kind of work I'm doing, and there are other people who are doing, similar work through other modalities. I cannot wait for the day when it becomes part of the school curriculum. I've been saying that. And then the day when it's no longer needed in the school curriculum, that's going to be even a better day. So yes, let's make that happen.
Yeah. Well, the final question then, Alja, is if you could detox anything in your life or the world right now, what would it be?
See, I thought it would be about me, but now I said the world. I'm like, dang, there's like a parchments list going through the rooms. No, let's keep it simple. How do we keep it simple? Criticism. And the reason I'm saying this is that the moment we detox criticism, we can move forward without judgment. And when we move forward without judgment, we move fast, because we don't get stuck and entangled in all these things of like, oh, but what is wrong with this and wrong with me and all this. We are able to simply non-judgmentally look at what is and say, do we like this or not? Do we want to change this or not? And then we can move in the right direction. So I would say that would be the one thing.
Wonderful. I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And everyone, so we're going to put everything in the show notes. You're going to be probably seeing her lovely face all over with these little clips, rewatching these little reels, and share this episode, because I really find that the more we share this content and in any episodes that are helpful for you, the more we can, of course, spread the word and just change and shift things in the way that, start doing our little part. So thank you guys so much. And thank you so much, Alja, for coming on. And again, my friends, as always, be well until next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.